Yes, so everyone knows the meeting is being recorded and we're being broadcast. So it's 7 o'clock. This is the Concord Finance Committee. I'm Chris Reynolds and I'm going to open up the meeting. So I'm going to do a roll call and hopefully I can see you all on my screen. So Chris Reynolds, I'm here. Mary Hartman.
Here.
Dee Ortner.
You're muted, Dee.
I'm muted, Dee.
Muted.
No, I
No.
can't hear you. All right, we'll come around
Yeah,
to you. Eric?
She doesn't indicate that she's muted.
Okay, maybe your audio isn't working. I don't know. Eric, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, Dean,
Here.
John,
I'm here.
Greg,
I am here.
Brian Taylor.
Here.
All right, Amrith.
Here.
Great. Okay, so Dee, can we hear you now? No.
No.
Okay. Chris Carmody, can you?
Wow, this is tragic that we can't hear Dee.
I know.
It's tragic for her, I think,
We
more
might
than
have to cancel the
dramatic
meeting.
for us.
We might have to cancel.
Dee, maybe you should log out and come back
Yeah.
or something to try to get your audio to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
So
we can't hear you.
D, you can try that, or you can try calling into and staying on your video.
Yeah, as you come in, it says, do you want to use computer audio? And you could use, no, I want to use my telephone or whatever. Yeah.
Hopefully you'll say yes to that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So in terms of membership, I wanted to let you know that Andrea Zoll resigned the committee. So she had some health issues, as we're aware, and she very much wanted to continue, but felt it was best that she come off. So we're very sorry to see Andrea go, and we thank her for all the good work she did on FinCom during her tenure. We also have a new member who's here with us tonight. So Amrith Kumar is new to Concord, but he's had a good experience. I'll let him tell you about his background with municipal government. So Amrith, you want to give a brief intro to of your background, so forth, to the committee?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. First, let me make sure you're able to hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. We
Cool.
can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yes, so I'll start my intro by saying my name is Amrit and I'm trying to fix my camera. I'm new to Concord. I moved into Concord in the end of May. I lived in Sterling before that, where I've served on a number of boards and committees, and I was the town moderator for the last 6 years. I have some experience with municipal finance from my experience in Sterling, and I'm happy to be part of this team and look forward to working with all of you.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, so now we'll go into the agenda. So we have.
Just a quick question,
Yes,
if I may.
yes, John, please.
Is Wade still on the committee?
No.
Okay.
Wade's term was up and he decided not to re-up. He had some other commitments, business
Okay.
commitments. Yeah.
All right,
Right,
sorry to
so,
ask. Thank
yeah,
you.
Wade.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. So we have, with Andrea's departure, we have one opening. So we're a group of 14 right now. So I'm looking for someone. Be great if we had someone from the business community in Concord. So that was one of the aspects that Andrea brought and Wade brought. And we're missing that at the moment. So that's what I've talked to Carmen about. So we're looking for a new member. Greg.
What's the new member's term? Would it be a 1, 2, or 3? Do you know what
I don't-
would it be?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how they queue it up. Andrea, I think would have had 1 or 2 years left. So that's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah,
Does
'cause
that
you might-
matter? I can find out.
I don't know. Somebody might say, hey, I want to try it out. Like I'll do a year or something like that.
Yeah,
Like, I know
okay.
I got a 3-year. Wade got 2.
Yeah.
And I think Dee, you came on at the same time I did, and like all of us had different terms, and Carmen never indicated. It could be 3 years, but maybe she indicated 3 years to me. I don't know what she indicated to the others, but
Okay.
maybe something of interest.
FinCom someday.
What's that?
You'll
He's
get-
making a joke.
Someday you'll get off.
I still got 9 years to go, right?
Right.
So Chris, Andrea's term was up in 2023. So if we're looking for replacement for her, it would be, I think, a 2-year.
A 2-year? Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
All right, good. Well, I'm gonna be out talking to folks, but if you know of anybody, there's a green card. The green card process is now online, so you can do it quickly and easily if people are interested, or they can give me a call or speak to Carmen. Okay, so we have some minutes. So did everyone get a chance to look at the minutes? This is the minutes from the June meeting. Okay, so are there any comments on the minutes?
These are the June 24th minutes, Christine?
That's correct, the June 24th minutes.
If you're accepting motions, I move approval as amended. I know someone made some changes.
Yep, there was a second round. Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Great.
Second.
All right, so if we're no discussion, we're ready for a vote. I'll take a vote. So Chris Reynolds, I vote yes. Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Hickling,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Greg Goriello,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Dee Ortner. I
You just
can't-
have to go
we
thumbs
can't
up
hear
or
you,
something, Dee.
But
We
I
can
just
hear
say
you.
yes. Yeah, I can see you said yes, yeah.
And Amrith as well, Chris.
Amrith, I can't see Amrith. Why can't I see him?
He's
I just have a
Oh,
black
you spoke
box.
it. Okay, I got it. Okay, Amrith, thank you. So we have unanimous vote on that.
So I
Okay.
have to abstain. I was not at the meeting.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay. All right. So Chris Carmody, can we do something for Dee or to get her audio?
Yeah, aside from trying to log in again, I think just calling in D on that.
Can you hear or see me? It's Peggy.
Yes, yes, Peggy, we can hear and see you.
Okay, I was having trouble.
We can only hear you,
With my
Peggy. We just have your image
You have
there.
a picture.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't have your video.
we don't have your live audio.
Um,
Live video, pardon me.
There she is.
There she is. Okay, yeah, it takes a second.
I was having trouble with my Gmail and I just emailed Carrie and she brought me in on my Outlook. So I
Okay.
don't know if that's the same problem other people are having.
No, I don't think so. All right, well,
She
Dee,
just has
Dee
an
and-
audio issue, I think.
yeah, she has an audio issue, but she can hear us. So you can just, nod your head or you can send us questions, Dee. So hopefully Chris and you can figure out how to make that better. Okay, so the minutes are approved and chair's comments. So I'm going to bring up a document that I shared with you. Let me see how I do this. Let me see. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so this is it's just an update of the document that we went through in June. So I took the comments that you guys made.
Christine,
Yes?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I can't hear anything you're saying. Am I the only one?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear fine.
I can
I'm the
hear.
only one that can't hear, or you all can't hear as well?
We can.
I
we
can hear.
I can hear. I can hear.
I'll log off and try to log back in.
Okay. Okay, all right, so this is an update of that document that we went through. So I'm going to take you through what's new or different in it, all right? If I can get it to, here we go. Okay. So this is the calendar sort of on this page. So the good thing that's happened is we now have a date for annual town meeting. It's May 1st, 2022. And that date has been approved by the select board. The remaining calendar dates have not been approved, but there are some tentative dates, and I use those dates to figure out when we need to have the final budget guidelines. So you can see that item there that's in bold. So based on my estimate, which hopefully they'll have firmed up a calendar pretty quickly, we should have to have our deadline for guidelines will be the end of the year, December 29th. Okay, so everything else is pretty much the same. So we're working on what we said before in terms of info request letters. We're going to talk about both of that and the SGR tonight. We're going to talk about when we're going to do orientation tonight as well. And we're also going to talk about when we want to schedule our meetings in the fall for school and town. So what moved in terms of the town meeting, so our town meeting typically was sort of early April, so it's moved back about a month. So that's about what's changed in the calendar. All right.
Is there
Any
anything that was driving that, Christine? It seems that seems kind of late for us, as a town. But.
I watched the discussion and I think I think that was, they came up with something that it was either going to be May 1st or May 8th. So I think they liked the idea of having another month in the process, Dean. And
Okay.
it is supposed to be indoors. It should be on it's a Sunday on 1 o'clock. So they took feedback from the town meeting survey that people were given. And I think that's where they came out.
It is a huge win for the schools. They
is, yeah.
have a lot of trouble preparing budgets and getting everything pulled together. So this is great for them.
Right. Right. So it's a little bit I mean, the fact that the extra month ends up being December for us in terms of our schedule is we don't really get a whole month, right? Because there's going to be vacations and holidays and so forth in there. So we'll probably get maybe a couple more weeks in our process.
Right.
So
Chris,
Yeah.
did they talk at all about whether they would allow presentations at this year's town meeting, since it's going to be indoors, or are they?
They didn't mention it, but they didn't mention that they wouldn't. My sense is it's going to be more similar to what we've had in the past, but the idea is probably to have a larger consent calendar. I imagine that if there are presentations, they will be limited in length. And the goal is to have it really completed. They got a lot of feedback that people liked it on a Sunday because folks with kids and so forth who work can go.
Yep.
And they also got feedback that I think people liked having it done in one day. The way they've set this up is if there was overflow in terms of content, items that hadn't yet been voted, they would go to Monday night. So I think their hope is to get it done on Sunday. And if there's something they can't get through, to do it on Monday night. So that means there's a larger consent calendar, probably.
Yeah, it's good. I don't know. It might be hard to get it done on one day if they allow presentations, but we'll wait and see.
I don't recall them saying that, but that's a good question, Mary.
Hey, Chris,
Okay.
Terry
Yeah.
Ackerman has her hand raised, so I think she wants to
Oh,
add to this,
great.
but
She can fill us in.
okay, hold on.
Hi, Terry.
She's joining.
Great.
We only have 3 attendees. Maybe we can just bring everybody in rather than have this, everybody's out and some people are not. Well, it's too late. We're working at it you just bring them all in. I just feel like this.
Who are the other people?
Carlin Reed, Stephen Crane,
Mhm.
and a person named John Kocher.
Yep.
There's only 3 attendees to the meeting.
Right.
Terry, you're on the panel.
Hi, yes, it took a while to rejoin and I can't find the video button. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, so yes, the town moderator, Carmen Reese, is saying that it's going to be basically the same as the other 2 town meetings we just had on a Sunday afternoon. However, she is inclined to allow presentations. So that's her latest thinking. But
Wait, I'm sorry, say that again, Carrie. I didn't.
she is inclined allow the presentations.
Okay.
That's one thing in the survey that I believe is going to be the change. But you may want to have Carmen come in and talk with the board, and, you know, have dialogue with her. Also, the date of May 1st was chosen. April has sometimes been too early. We don't have good revenue numbers in time. We have other problems with deadlines earlier, and June is much too late. The weather's too nice, people are leaving on vacation. So Carmen liked the beginning of May, and Stephen and I also like that. So he came out with May 1st because May 8th was Mother's Day. So Sunday, May 1st will be town meeting.
Great.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry. Okay. Any other questions on the calendar?
Yeah, Christine, can I ask,
Yeah.
actually even maybe a question for Terry? Is this going to sort of be the new date that we set? Because everybody, like Dean saying this is good, you know, Terry's saying, you know, it's a little bit good too because of April was a little bit too late. Is this, do you think going forward going to be the new date for town meeting?
I don't know. That's up to the moderator and the future select board, and also the citizens. If citizens like May 1st and they give Carmen good feedback, then maybe it will stay at May 1st. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Okay.
it's the, Terry, it is the select board's ultimate decision, not the moderator.
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. So moving off the calendar. So this was the topics that we talked about last time. I haven't changed them. I did sort of create a little bit different stratification. So what I call short term, this is the stuff that we need to, we're going to really try to get done. So some of this we have to, it affects what we're doing in FY22 is in the short term bucket. Medium term, some of those things we'll work on, obviously middle school building project. The others, maybe, maybe not. And then ongoing and long term, some of these you'll see in a page we're going to work on. Other ones we're just going to put on the list for future topics. So it's really in terms of the things that we sort of have to get done, be good to get done, might get done, if you will. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're going to go to the what I call kind of the work plan. So this is and this page is really addressing the items that are in the short-term topic list of the things we intend to get done in FY22. So I'm not going to go through the chart. I sent it out in advance and draft. You've seen it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the deliverables, just so we're okay on that. So at the top line there, in terms of town coordination, communications and hearings, we obviously have our FinCom report, which will be due out sometime in April. That will include the 5-year projection. We have hearings probably February, March. We obviously have our minutes. And I wanted to talk for a second about personnel board articles. So one of the, there are 2 articles that come to us each year from the personnel board related to roles and salary bands within the town. And we had some questions on it this past year, and I asked Lois Wassoff to do a little research for us and come back and give us some history and talk about, so that we could talk about what our approach should be to those articles. We don't have an observer for the personnel board. We typically do our work with respect to the budget and labor costs in the town through our normal budget review process. So we don't seek information from the personnel board. So that's one that I've added to sort of the town coordination list to make sure we're comfortable that those articles should come to FinCom and that we should run those hearings. So that's different. Let's see, the town and school budget, obviously Parashar has the guidelines process. We know, we've been through that. We're going to talk about that today as well. So you'll hear more about that process. Middle school building, we're going to be working on getting ready for a special town meeting. We don't yet know the timing of that. We suspect it will be in December or January, followed by a ballot vote. So as soon as we know more on the calendar, we can figure out how that interacts with our schedule. The capital planning articles in process. So we're going to, again, once we finalize the calendar, we know that in November, under the proposed, the recommended process now, we will have a meeting with the select board and the school committee to talk about their prioritized tier 3 capital items. So that's going to be a new aspect to our process. So Eric's going to work with us in getting that figured out. Affordable housing. So this is one of the items that is on the short-term list that's also kind of ongoing for the town, and probably it's on a longer-term track as well. So in particular for this year, we'd like to have a framework to evaluate the requests that we expect to get for free cash at some point in the article process this year. So that is being led by Ray Andrews, and we'll talk about the committee assignments a little bit later. Enterprise units. So this is really about the light plant. And they have there is a new committee, which you would have remembered from the town meeting, that there's a group that's interested in looking at broadband expansion, and that the broadband, there's going to be a new committee that will be seated. So we will have an observer. So Greg's going to be our observer to both CMLP and this broadband expansion committee that's going to look at what the our connection to it will be related to funding. So there will be a cost associated with trying to get the broadband out to about 20% of the town that has probably has some more difficult access issues, and the questions may arise about funding. So we want to be an observer and understand if there's going to be amounts that are needed to be provided by the town. So any questions on the work plan? And unfortunately right now, because I've got this screen up, I can't see you. So if you can shout out, that's the best way to get me to recognize you. Okay, I'm going to keep going then. Let's see. Oops. Okay. And on the longer term side, so we do have economic vitality, and that's Mary is going to lead on that. You can see the committees that are associated with that. She's not covering all those committees, but that's where some of the information may come from. And this is really just us taking a look at what options there might be to expand the commercial base and reduce reliance on the residential property tax. So it'll be a longer term goal. But so what I've asked Mary, Eric, and Ray, the folks that are leads on some of these topics, is to come back to the committee with a plan that says, here's what we're going to do, this is what we're going to find out, and this is what we're going to get done in FY22. So we can get more specifics on that. So I hope I have narrowed it down for you, because I know that was one of the discussion items from last meeting. So I think this looks achievable to me, but I'm interested if anybody has any thoughts on it or comments and, thinks this is still too big of an agenda. Okay, I'm going to take that as good news.
It's good.
Good. Okay. All right. I thought I would just do this as well, just to sort of talk, if you're involved as a lead or you're involved as a support, to talk about how the roles are defined. So it's pretty simple, I think. So the lead is really making sure we've got coverage on the right committees that it might be impacting that topic, and make sure the committee assignments are done, bringing in updates on the topic to the FinCom meetings, and working with me on the agenda to the extent that we need to include time in a meeting to discuss the topic. On support, if you're on a support for a topic, you'll be assigned, you potentially are assigned a town meeting, you may be assigned some requested research, and then obviously when we're discussing the topic, we'd be looking for you to participate in the topic.
Chris?
Yeah.
Mary, this might be a good time to remind, especially the new people, that even if you're a lead, your role really is an observer role. you're supposed to observe and be independent.
Yes,
Not get too involved in the nuts and bolts of the committee itself, and certainly not take ownership for some of the of their final recommendations. So I just wanted to, I know I was confused when I was new to the FinCom. What is my role? You observe, you answer questions, you can ask questions, but it's important that you maintain an independence.
yep. Well, that's right. And actually, that's a good segue to the
And
next one.
the other piece of that puzzle is, as an observer, you're really not representing the FinCom. You don't have
Yes.
the talking stick for the whole committee.
That's right.
If they ask you a
Right.
question, it is, and you offer some comment, it is your opinion that you're offering, not the position of the FinCom, unless we've made a voted position that you can then express and convey. But otherwise, you're kind of on your own, and you kind of need to identify that yourself as that. I'm the observer for the FinCom. I'm speaking on my own behalf in this comment, or so, some way. That's
Yep.
all.
Yep, no, that's right.
Well, the point being that each of those committees are appointed and they're the responsible party, and we're just reporting back to each other
That's right.
about what
That's
they're
right.
doing. We're not on that committee
No.
That's exactly right.
anymore.
That's right. That's right. I
Most
mean,
of us
really-
have done them, but not now.
Yeah, I mean, really, so that's why I call them, these are data sources for us, right? So these are other committees in town that are doing work or evaluating issues, whatever they're working on. And to the extent that there's a financial impact that we think, FinCom needs to understand or think about, that's really the purpose, is to bring that information back to the full committee so we can talk about it. It's a data source. These other groups are data sources. Okay. So now if we look at how it actually plays out in terms of observer assignments, you can see them here. I have 2 that I need to fill. So I need Minuteman Regional High School coverage, and I also need the recreation group. And the affordable housing ones, I'll talk about that separately, but is anybody interested in doing Minuteman? So I think, I know Amrith, I haven't assigned you yet. So does that one interest you, or does recreation interest you?
Either's as good. I don't have kids in the school and I use the rail trail, so recreation sounds good.
That sounds good to me. Recreation it is. Excellent. Anybody interested in Minuteman?
Christina, I can take up Minuteman since
Excellent.
I'm only doing library.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Excellent. Great. Okay. Any other, let me talk about affordable housing. So Ray could not come tonight, but he will, I think it's Dee and John Hickley. Between the 3 of you, you'll figure out which ones you want to take. So I'm going to leave that to Ray. So he'll communicate with you to figure out what ones you're going to take, and he'll let me know. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. And the future topics, so the ones that we'd hold off to future, meaning not in this current year, is anything around, understanding more about how climate change could affect town financially, and this concept of financial resiliency, which is sort of, reviewing lessons learned from 2008 as well as 2020 pandemic, and maybe taking a look at free cash and stabilization reserve policies and how that might impact financial resiliency. So that one we don't appear to have bandwidth to take on. Not this year anyway. Okay, that's it from mine. So I'm going to stop sharing on that one. Let's see. Other things, I think, Carrie, now let's talk about, you want to talk about orientation a bit, see where we are on that?
Sure. So each year, except for last year, the Finance Committee has one orientation meeting in August. You don't have a regular business meeting then, so it's a good opportunity to have the orientation meeting. It is open to any member of the Finance Committee, and for the time that I've been here in the town of Concord, we've usually had about half of the members who attend. And it's a great session for new members, and I think it's a very good and beneficial session newer members of the committee because there is a presentation, a formal presentation, but obviously the questions that people ask may generate discussion about some items that you're not familiar with. So we typically do this the first Thursday in August. When we talked about this last month, I know Peggy said she was interested in attending, but the first 2 weeks in August, if memory serves me correctly, were not good. Unfortunately, the last two, the third and fourth Thursday in August doesn't work for me either because I'm bringing kids back to school both of those days. So I'm open. I have a lot of openings in August other than that. And I'm wondering, Wednesdays are probably typically a good day. That Wednesdays aren't days that I tend to have other committee meetings. So I'm wondering if there is a Wednesday in August, and it is in the evening, maybe the third Wednesday or the fourth Wednesday, if that would work for people who think they might attend. And the topics that we cover, they're really split in two. We spend part of the meeting talking about what the Finance Committee does outside of budget. So what your responsibilities are for everything other than budget. And then we spend a good part talking about the guidelines process and the budget process.
And Carrie, it would be a Zoom, would it?
Boy, I'd much rather do in person if at all possible. But I understand people might not be comfortable with that. We could do either. We can also do a hybrid meeting, but I would like to try for in person if possible.
What's the status of the townhouse, Carrie?
So the townhouse is the construction is being completed, I think, as we speak, because I received a message today that we're going to start relocating furniture back into the townhouse as soon as next week. So if we're doing something mid-August, it may be in the townhouse, but if not, probably at 141 Kais Road.
Okay. All right.
Sorry,
So
I don't mean to turn this into a technology session, but do we have a technology to have a hybrid meeting with both in person and in remote?
Yes, we do. And the select board has been meeting in hybrid mode, at least for the last 2 meetings, and it's worked rather well.
right. So Carrie, one of the things we were talking about was whether the hearing room in the townhouse was going to be changed in any way to make it more flexible to allow use of that room.
And there are some improvements that are being made to that room to address the acoustics issues and I believe the lighting issues, as well as just the seating issues, you know, making sure that we have a good setup for a large committee like the Finance Committee.
That pretty much covers it. Let's see, the lighting, the sound.
Yeah, right.
Maybe we should reduce the size of the committee.
As long as we can't hear D.
Yeah, don't say that. Yeah, if we do decide the committee, we'll have a lot of trouble getting quorum. So,
Yeah.
okay. In terms of the date then, Carrie, so you want to do a show of hands to see either the 3rd or the 4th? Sorry, Wednesday during the 3rd or the 4th week? Is that what we're talking about?
Oh, Peggy's
Okay, so if I'm the only one, you know, if I will be on vacation, I'll be with my whole family. I might be super happy to closet myself in a room with my computer by then. So if it, you know, if it is remotely accessible and I'm the only one that can't do those 2 Thursdays, Carrie, you know, go ahead and schedule it and I'll try to make it happen.
Great. Thank you.
I'm happy to
She's
try.
offering Wednesdays, Peggy.
What?
She's offering Wednesdays, though.
Or Wednesday, yeah. If I
Yeah,
know ahead of time, I can work around it.
Okay. All right. So you want to send something out, Carrie, or I just want to pick a date so we have a date for people can put it in their calendar.
I can,
I can do all the later dates. I can do any date later.
okay. So I certainly can send something out and inquire about August 18th, Wednesday, August 18th, or Wednesday, August 25th. And then we can go back and look at the earlier Thursdays. I'll do a survey.
Okay, let's try and make it either the 18th or the 25th, okay? Because
Okay.
otherwise we'll go around and around and I just want to pick a date on it. So, okay, good. Compliance. So the last topic under my comments is on compliance. So I reached out to the town clerk just to check to see how we were doing on compliance. So there's a couple of requirements, right, for committee members. So when you're first appointed, you have to be sworn in, and your second term, you have to be sworn in. And then we have an open meeting law affirmation, there's an ethics affirmation, and then there's a conflict of interest rule affirmation, and there's some training that goes along with that every 2 years. So the town clerk sent me where they believe we are on that, and I will be sending something around. So to make sure that if we have something to hand in or to make an appointment, right now you have to be sworn in via appointment because they are not back in the townhouse soon. I assume we can walk in and do it, but we do have some things that we need to clean up. All right, so I'm going to send that around so you guys can see that. Okay. Yeah.
Christine,
Yes, Peggy.
it's reminding everyone the town clerk is out at Harvey Wheeler in the basement.
Right.
I made a trip to the townhouse before I made a trip to Harvey Wheeler.
Right. Good point. Good point.
And they're around the corner down in the basement.
It's hard to find. Okay. All right. Well, we'll hope they'll be back in the townhouse soon. Okay, so that's it for my comments. And the next topic is we're going to talk about the guideline information request letters. We're going to talk about the sustainable growth rate and guidelines planning, and Parashar is going to take us through that.
All right, thanks, Chris, appreciate it. What I'd like to do is perhaps go over the thoughts on the SGR and the guideline process. I know it was a little bit late yesterday, but hopefully folks had a chance to at least skim through the presentation. And then maybe after we talk about those two topics, we can turn our attention to the guideline letters themselves. I'd like to make this as interactive as possible, so feel free to ask questions, etc. I'll go ahead and share my screen just so that we're all on the same page. And of course, I've got to Zoom works differently on different platforms. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to share the PowerPoint slides that we circulated yesterday. Hopefully, I think everybody can see this. Quickly just go over the background of the SGR and the current formula. This was a little bit of a learning experience for me as well. I've been on the committee for about 3 years, and I kind of vaguely had a sense of what the timelines were, et cetera, for the SGR, but I dug through old minute notes and presentations. And Dean, I literally plagiarized a presentation you made probably a couple of years ago from one of the presentations. So thank you very much. And we'll do that. And then, you know, I thought a little bit about the guidelines, the way they're currently, or the SGR formula, the way it's currently set, and have some thoughts about maybe how we can build on what's already been done. And then we'll turn our attention to some ideas around developing some cost estimates and how the two can be used to, I think, hopefully inform our guideline process for the next fiscal year, and then kind of see where we want to go. So a lot of words up here, but the background started, I guess, probably, I'm thinking maybe even 2017, but 2018 were the first sort of official official mentions in some of the FinCom meetings about the sustainable growth rate. And back then, the members of the FinCom, I know Dean, you were on it, and I don't know whether Mary and Chris and a couple of the others were on it, was really intended to really just raise awareness of kind of what's happening to property taxes relative to people's ability to afford. And so the notion was to develop a bit of a guardrail, if you will. It says, hey, we're at this level of taxation today, and we think if we have some guardrails, to make sure that they stay affordable slash appropriate, whatever sort of, subjective criteria you want to attach, they ought to grow at this rate over the next 5 years, basically. And so in the middle of June at one of the FinCom meetings, there was a definition of what the FinCom at the time meant by fiscal sustainability. And you can see the definition there, the bullets there, right? In other words, make sure that you keep the levy limit capacity there to avoid general overrides in the future. At the same time, balance, you maintain free cash balance while making sure you continually investing in ongoing capital needs. So we're not trying to be stinting, right? We want to make sure we're investing appropriately in capital, but at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, make sure we're not burdening taxpayers with really high levels of taxation in the future. But at the same time, again, make sure we want to address a lot of the priorities that Concord residents have. And I think this is really important. The last bullet, I think from my perspective, is really important to keep in mind is it wasn't intended to replace the budget guidelines, but be basically an information tool, a tool to help get a sense of where's the budget headed and how does it compare to what sort of affordability means, if you will, ability to pay. Let's see. So the current formula is what you see here. And so what ended up happening was, I think at one point, the idea was the concept of the SGR and a requirement to publish it was going to go into a town meeting. For whatever set of circumstances, it didn't go to town meeting on the warrant process. But the FinCom did actually adopt a methodology November 2018. You see the formula up there. In essence, it's the 12-month CPI looking backwards, if you will, plus a 10-year T-bill. Divide those two by 2 and use the same rate that you get the growth rate for the next 5 years. And the notion, of course, is to have it updated annually. And you can see if we follow this methodology today, you end up with a 2.34% rate for the next 5 years. And that's based on basically the 12-month CPIU for 12 months ending last May. In Boston was about it actually was 3.2. And the forward-looking 10-year yield on the T-bill first day of July was 1.48. And you simply add those two numbers together, you divide, and you get 2.34. Before I go on, I just make sure is the formula clear to everybody, or should I go into a little bit more details? Relatively simple math, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And again, the notion here was to have this serve as in essence, a proxy for ability to pay. Again, making no judgment about whether the current levels are right or not, nor frankly, a willingness to pay, because that's the other equation. Residents could always vote, obviously, to increase taxes at a higher rate than what the SGR, et cetera, is. But again, one measure of ability to pay. So as I thought about this, I think the concept of Peggy, go ahead. Question?
So is the CPI, is that linked to the Social Security increases?
So yes and no. So the Social Security increases are based on CPIU nationally. The formula here is the regional 12-month CPIU. It's Boston, so it's going to be urban based. So conceptually, yes, but the precise number will have differed from what Social Security increases by.
And which one is higher?
I don't know, Peggy, which one was higher in the past 12 months.
Okay.
The national or the Boston one, I don't know the answer.
Because I feel like the affordability for people on Social Security and fixed income is a different story from people kind of riding the wave of, salary growth in the Boston region.
I agree, and you'll see on the next slide, one of the changes. I think that's one of the things we ought to consider changing.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So completely agree. It was some of those things I was thinking, you know, the other thought that occurred to me is the CPI that we're looking at today is backward looking. So you've got half a formula that looks backward, 12-month inflation for the previous 12 months, which I'm not sure how it necessarily relates to what's going to happen in the future. And so as I thought about it, you know, I think we can improve the formula by doing a couple things. One is using projections that are out the next 5 years, number one. And then number two, actually taking into account maybe a more appropriate measure of affordability for the two different, broadly speaking, taxpayer groups in town, right? And so if the first part of this formula takes a look at folks over 65 years of age, what proportion of residents do they comprise of people 18 and over? In other words, people presumably having income and paying taxes, and using that weight and multiplying it by a projected CPIU. And that CPIU is the one, it's a national number, and that is the one that's used for Social Security. And then the second half is to take the share of folks that are basically wage earners, et cetera, 18 and 65 and over, use the denominator that we talked about a minute ago, and actually use a projected change in personal income per capita. Now, the sources, as you can see at the bottom, for the projections come from the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan arm of Congress that in essence has a macroeconomic model of the US that they use for making estimates of federal legislation and federal administrative changes, et cetera. And it is rebased and updated every 6 months. There's a July baseline that is made publicly available. All the data is out there public, and that's what I used here to show you that if we were to use this method, you can see the bottom row of what the SGR would look like using this formula here. Let me pause here. And by the way, the demographic information, as you can see, is from US Census, looking at Concord itself, 2019 report from the US Census. So let me pause here and see if there's any questions I can answer, any thoughts folks might have.
Sorry, Parshar, can I? Go ahead, Mary. I see Mary putting her hand up.
No, go ahead, John. I'll wait for you. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask you a quick question about, with respect to the projected change in personal income per capita, Parshar, whether you knew whether the CBO numbers were distorted at all by some of the CARES package payments that have been made over the last year. Would those have been included in those numbers and, well, I guess increased it by whatever that amount was?
I don't know the answer, John, because the data tables don't get into that detail, but I will tell you that at least for state fiscal year 2022, I believe, the change in personal income, and by the way, the personal income is inclusive of wages, salaries, dividend, and investment income, right? It doesn't include farm income, et cetera, but it was 0.4, and then that's expected to bounce back up in future years up to, I think one of the years as high as 3.6. But I don't know the answer, John, as to whether it does or doesn't. I think the other thing to note, you know, at least as I've been following the CARES Act from a work perspective, the money that went directly to individuals relative to personal income was a pretty small amount. I know the tax credit and all that makes a lot of headlines, but at the end of the day, when you take a look at overall personal income, including investment and dividend income, et cetera, it was a relatively small number. Mary, you were going to ask a question.
Yeah.
I think Dean's got a hand up, and Amrith, you've got your hand up.
Okay, Parashar, let me go first then. First of all, thank you for doing this, because I know we had talked about the limitations of our prior formula. I just want to point out the prior formula did look forward, though, in some sense, because it looked at 10-year, the 10-year Treasury bill was expected inflation. So it was forward-looking in that sense. I know when we talked about that, the way we were calculating it before, one of the problems with our old formula is that it didn't take into account wage growth in the area, so that it didn't take into account what does it cost the town and the schools to recruit and retain good talent, right? And that's what So that's what we were trying to somehow integrate that into the formula. So instead of just keeping up with inflation, we're also making sure that we have the way to recruit and retain good talent. This particular formula, though, isn't looking at wage growth. If I understand it, it's looking at income, which is different than wage growth. I think you're using income as a proxy for wage growth. Do we have wage growth data? I guess that's
So we do, Mary, and let me respond. So first of all, I think, so remember, this side of the equation looks at taxpayers' ability to pay. And as you'll see in a few slides, I do think it's important to incorporate wage growth for municipal employees, school employees, into a model, but I think it's more appropriate to incorporate it into the cost model. So as you'll see in a few more slides, I think another tool that could be helpful for us, and frankly used with the SGR in conjunction, is to look at, well, what happens to people's pocketbooks, the taxpayers, and that's what this results in terms of money coming into their household with which they can pay future taxes, which are, of course, related to costs. And then I think we're recommending developing a 5-year cost model of school and town spending, where one of the components would, of course, be wages and salaries and benefits. And you'll see there that, again, from the same Congressional Budget Office model, we can actually project out increases in wages and benefits. So that's the place, I think, where it's more appropriate.
Then let me finish my thought. My thought was, I never thought that the SGR was looking at people's ability to pay, which I think that's what we're doing here, because that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, whereas the people who move here have the ability to pay, and the people who leave here don't have the by what rate should our spending increase to cover inflation and to also cover most of our spending, which is personnel, at a rate that, again, attracts and retains good talent. That's very different in my mind than ability to pay. That's all.
Fair enough. Yep. Let me go around. I think Dean had his hand up, and then I see Eric and Greg and Amrit. So I'll go in the order I saw them. Dean, Amrit, Greg, and Eric.
Just quickly, since you're calling on me first, instead of using Census Bureau data, the town does an annual census, but it's a state law that we all have to do it. And the town clerk can cut up that data any which way you want. So if you need data on residents over 18 or number of people over 65, she can help get you the data directly from the direct town census, and it's done every year. The thing that she can also do, I believe, is exclude the people who are living in the prison, whereas the Census Quick Facts, I believe, includes people in the prison and they're really not paying taxes. So it sort of skews the numbers to include them as part of the population. So those are just some data points. I do sort of agree, though, also with what Mary was saying, which is that this is, well, I think it was intended to achieve some sort of growth rate that is in line with, the cost of living, the increases in the cost of living. What was driving this in the first place were a number of curves that were shown that showed how quickly our taxes were going up, and then it was mapping that against historical CPI, historical wage growth, historical tenure, T-bill, which is a future indicator. And all of those had very low slope lines, and our tax growth was quite steep. So I think the anxiety on the part of the Finance Committee that got us to this point was that our tax increases were going up at a rate which far exceeded normal indicators of upward pressure on all kinds of costs, housing, all kinds of costs. So that was why we were trying to rein in our spending a bit, and it wasn't necessarily the ability of the community to pay, which is how you're kind of configuring this a bit. So I'll stand down and you can go to somebody else.
Amrith, and then I saw Greg and Eric.
So my thoughts are similar to what Mary started and Dean continued on. One thing which I was going to ask if we could do, since this formula is based on data which is available, historical data is available, can we go back 10 years and project what this proposed model would have done for each of the past 10 years looking ahead and see whether that passes the smell test? If you have the data, I'm happy to do the play forward and show you what this model would generate. And then we can look at it and say, wow, it produces 11% in 1 year, or it produces -3% in one. We need to tweak this formula because we don't want to be surprised by the result it produces 2 years from now. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Eric? And then Greg, I think. I was also hands up.
That Amrith beat me to it. That was exactly the same I was going to make, that we could look at the actuals from the last 5 or 10 years and see how closely they align with what really happened. So good, good suggestion.
Greg?
Yeah, Dean caught my point was, I don't think it's the willingness of, or how the ability to pay, but if we posted these numbers that our sustainable growth rate is 3.5, 4, or 4, whatever, I think a lot of people are going to sort of balk at that, based on Dean's comments of the other lines, very shallow slope as opposed to what we would propose here. So Dean covered exactly what I was going to sort of mention.
Okay, fair points. Anyone else? I can't see everybody. I'm hearing none.
Sorry, I'm going to try one more. Does it make sense to try and compute the same model for neighboring towns and see what it would do to us relative to other towns? Or sample towns, or whatever we want to compare ourselves with?
Well, so I guess before we start doing modeling and everything, I think it would probably be helpful to align on what the goal of the SGR is, right? And so if the notion was, as Mary and Dean and others have said, that in a sense, it was to proxy what the costs are for services, food, et cetera, then we ought to use a formula, maybe just CPI. I think if we can align on what the purpose is, then we can model something. And I don't know if I think that was you, to your point, for each town, it would be the same because we're using national numbers in this particular model, right? Except for the weight in terms. So I guess maybe we ought to see if we can align on, and maybe this is, I'll look to Chris a little bit here. Is this something that we want to think about? And then, or do we want to say, you know what, let's just stick with the current SGR because it reflected what the original intent was, and let's just move on. So
can I ask a quick question? Parashar, do you have wage growth for the area?
So
not income.
Short answer is no. The CBO model does it at a national level, and they have.
No, okay, do you have wage growth nationally?
Yeah, we have wage growth nationally, both projections and the historical data. I think 4 or 5 years. I don't know how far back it goes, but we do have projections of wage growth
as opposed to income.
Yeah.
So if I may share my screen, I would just want to put up a copy that I just dug up quickly from the Randall curve, as it is known.
Yes.
After Scott Randall, a former finance committee member who would show us this chart every year. Let me see if I can share my screen here. See if I can find the right place. Here we go. Okay, so let me see if I can, I don't know if I can maximize that, but that's basically it. So can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, so basically what you have there is the orange line, which is the highest slope line, is our if our taxes all start at the 0 part of the point of the axis, and we're increasing on a percentage basis. The 10-year T-bill is in, T-note is in there. There's an employment cost factor. I forgot there. These can be referenced. I'm sure I can find the references for all of these lines that are coming from U.S. U.S. Census sources. Many probably from the American Community Survey data. But anyway, we have a home value median, which is regional. That purple line there, we had some really tough years in 09, 10, 11, where things kind of skidded along, but then they started to climb back up. But taxes had gone up by 50% over the history of this curve, which is a 10-year, which is a 10-year historical chart. They had gone up by 50%, and nothing else had gone up by even barely 30. So this is what was driving us to try to find a way to contain the march of our tax bill. It was outstripping every possible index that we could map, and so that's how we got started down this rabbit hole. So is to try to kind of align the cost of our local taxation with some of the other factors in that cause like employment, and I think Mary's got it right there, which is wage growth. We have this thing called the employment cost index that I think comes from the American Community Survey, which is probably what employers have to pay to get labor, and it's an indexed number. So this is what was getting us started on this merry-go-round, and I'm just questioning whether trying to say, okay, this many people over 65 and this many people, who are in the wage earning capacity, they can pay, and these people are kind of constrained by inflationary factors. And I feel like we're getting a little far afield of what we were hoping to achieve. That's all. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing, and there you go.
So I observed, I sat through some of this for, I think, 1 year before we came up with what the SGR was. So I was new to the committee. So what Dean just described is what I recall. And since then, I also recall we had a public hearing on the SGR, and we had a lot of feedback from citizens that depending upon what your view is of what the guardrail for tax growth should be, people had different ways of thinking about it, of calculating it. And I believe the committee spent a lot of time debating it. And so, and what we just have done for the last 25 minutes or so is a drop in the ocean to the time that we spent as a committee
Yes.
talking about this. So it is not an easy thing to measure. I do not want to invest that same amount of time in a revision. So I don't believe we have time to do it. I did think it was useful to come and talk about it and see if people have, and in particular, because we have a lot of new members. And I think this notion of what is the guardrail and what do we need is something we should probably talk about. So it's good, I think, to get some grounding in it. And my intention was not to have us vote on a change this evening. It was really to bring it up and talk about it. And Parashar has done a fair amount of work, and it's connected to some of the next items he will talk about. But if we, without spending a lot of time, I think it's difficult to update the SGR. I do. I think it's hard because it's a complicated subject. So unless people sort of immediately said, oh, yes, this makes, much more sense and it's what we wanted, I would rather not spend a lot of time as a committee on this. But I'm obviously, I want to hear what the committee has to say.
Peggy, I think had her hand up. Peggy?
Peggy?
Yeah, I just on Dean's graph for the tax rate, and believe me, it's certainly noticeable how much it's escalated. But I wonder if we should disaggregate capital expenditures, override schools and that sort of thing from regular growth, that because we're talking about wages and operating expenses. So that's all. I mean, it's obviously shot up, with the high school, the middle school, and the other schools. But if you sort of peel that off, where are we otherwise? That's all. Probably discussed that ad infinitum before I got on. So
yeah, I think we did. And I mean, it's what you have to pay, right? So,
yeah, but one is sort of like just have to do it, and the capital expenditures, I think, is where
yes, there's more discretion. Yep.
all the agencies in the town are, under the gun to have a capital plan, to spread it out, and that sort of thing. So I'd be curious on how that top line looked without the capital expenditure. That's all. No big deal.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So good discussion. It looks like we should just use the current rate. No rate is perfect. And as I said earlier, it was a proxy to balance a number of different things. So we'll just stick with the current rate. Let me turn to the next topic, which is the idea of, in essence, developing a 5-year cost model for town and school spending, right? As I was thinking about this, if we've got the SGR sort of one curve, if you will, in terms of ability to pay, how to measure or a way to ensure that taxes don't grow at a rate higher than some level formula that we have, et cetera, however you get to that proxy or that curve guardrail, we ought to be able to compare. We should. I think it might help our deliberations if we actually had a sense of what's happening to spending, not just in the current fiscal year that we're talking about for fiscal year 24, 23, but also what's happening in the future, because obviously some of the decisions that get made in one year have downstream implications as well. And so the thought is, and I've had conversations with Carrie and Jared and Stephen and Lori about developing a very simple 5-year model, 5 or 6 different categories that would, in essence, project out current service level. And if you don't make any changes, obviously, because changes always will affect the baseline one way or the other, kind of what that spending looks like over the next 5 years. And the thought process is, certainly you take a look at what's already locked in the union contracts for the near years. The out years, you can use data, the employment cost index that's in the CBO model that Dean mentioned can be used there. Incorporate the known debt services, non-excluded debt, build a very simple model, nothing that's very complex, but really hopefully help us focus in on what are some of the key drivers, not just for next year, but out over the next 5 years or so, and use that as a way to inform the guidelines for the next fiscal year. So the thought was you'd have one model on the spending side to see, to the best ability of Jared and Carrie, what might be happening over the next 5 years. And then you've got an SGR, which gives you a sense of, well, how do we make sure tax rates don't go up above a certain level? How do the two align or don't align? And, to the extent that maybe they don't align, well, what are the reasons? Because I think there can be very good reasons why costs might go up faster than, the guardrail that you have with an SGR. And I think Dean mentioned one of them is maybe we want to actually invest in wages and salaries to keep up with the marketplace. And that will mean increasing spending that, maybe higher than what you've seen in the SGR. And so again, it was a basis to provide a framework for having some of these conversations to help basically inform, strategic choices that we're making as a town and for not only next fiscal year, but the future years as well. So that was a bit of the thought process there. And so,
hey, Parashar, can we just stick on that? So I think this could be very helpful. So this is something that we talk about, or as I've been on the committee, we've talked about an inability to sort of focus on, well, what a contractual, what a labor costs really look like over a contract period, that being one of the biggest drivers for budget. So to the extent that we could get something that's forward looking And in particular, we can use that to overlay, capital spending as well. I think that could be very helpful for us in thinking about what the tax burden on residents is going to look like. And so I think it raises the level of discussion if it can be created. So again, these aren't projections that we're doing, just to be clear. These are projections that we would ask the town and the schools to prepare. And they don't have to be complex. I think they can be pretty simple because the costs are really driven by debt service and labor and, CapEx, as if there's 2 or 3 categories that get you to the numbers. So I know from my perspective, it would be helpful to understand what those drivers are and see what happens over a projected period. Other thoughts? Other folks think about it?
I've got a thought. I agree. I think this is a great idea to get the schools and the towns involved in doing projections out 5 years. We'd also have to get the school committee and the select board involved, obviously, because they're the ones that actually put these budgets in front of the town. The other thing I really like about it too is that hopefully it will bring in the fixed costs as opposed to just the guideline spending. And when we look forward, will we translate this into the expected impact on the tax rates going forward? Or are we going to take it to that level, or will it just be projections? Because I think that would make it what we're trying to do right now with the 5-year projection that we publish in the FinCom report. So
I know Carrie's on the call here, so I'll kind of leave this up to her. One of the things I wanted to do out of this is try to do this in a way that doesn't involve additional work on the part of Jared and Carrie, to the extent that they can do this in a simple way.
Yep.
I'm thinking, maybe I'm speaking out of school, and Stephen and Carrie can kick me under the table figuratively, is if you've got some notion of what the costs are going up, and you make some assumption about what level of state revenue and other revenue, you could probably figure out, maybe, again, at a rough level. We're not, the intention here is not to look back 3 years later and say, hey, how come you were off by %? This is really more as a framework and a discussion tool, if you will. And so you could probably take a stab, rough sense of, what might happen. But I'll let Carrie or Stephen talk and give you that answer, Mary.
So I can start, and Stephen, I'm happy to have you jump in. The current 5-year forecast that we run is one that the fixed costs are driving it, the revenue and the fixed costs. And it calculates the total amount that's available to guidelines. And so this would be a change in how we're putting it together, where we're adding in the guidelines costs and coming up with what's the impact to property tax. So it's just sort of a shift in the model. We certainly can calculate what the estimated impact to property tax would be. That's easy enough. And I think probably both of these pieces of information will continue to run the 5-year forecast the way that we have, but then add this to it and you can compare the two, because the 5-year forecast that we have right now shows the amount available to guidelines each year using the same set of assumptions that we currently have, which are somewhat constrained because of COVID, because we don't know exactly when revenues will return to normal, but it's producing an availability for guidelines between 1.7 and 1.9% per year. So we flip the model and say, what do we need? It's gonna be much higher. Well, I shouldn't say much higher, but it's certainly going to be higher than what is available.
Mary, does that answer your question?
not really. Now I'm confused, actually. What do you mean it's going to be higher? What's going to be higher, Carrie?
So
I got lost.
when the forecast is driven by the guidelines expenses, it's going to, this is my hypothesis, it is going to produce an increase higher than what is available if we are using the same set of assumptions for revenue, particularly for property tax. So the main assumption for property tax in the current 5-year forecast is that we are going to keep the unused levy capacity percent constant. That number right now is 4.55%.
Right.
Yep.
All right.
So if I could throw a comment, in, it sounds to me, Carrie, like you're already doing a model that meets Parashar's basic requirement. And you're taking it another step further in your comments, which is we can flip the thing around so that it's now really informing how much the taxation will be driven. So it starts to become similar to the 5-year tax projection model that's already in existence, but totally independent of anything you're doing to project what's available. So I really think that what you're already doing may meet what Parashar is asking for, is what I'm saying. Mary's asking to see if there's a way to go another step further and have it start to, kind of drive the 5-year tax projection effort that we make anyway, which is a distinct thing. And we do need to do that every year. But in terms of what Parashar is asking for, it sounds like you're already doing it.
I
I
don't
would
think
s-
you are. I don't think it
No,
is.
I,
Yeah.
No?
I would
No.
agree because we're not projecting wages. The model we have just says what's available,
Right.
Okay. All right.
assumptions.
Yeah.
All right. I see.
Yeah.
So this would be more zero-based, if you will, Dean, right? This
Right.
is
I
more-
get it.
Yeah.
Now. I'm starting
yeah.
to understand here what
Yeah.
the difference is.
Stephen?
Yeah, Chris, I just think I'd comment is, like I said, Carrie and I have discussed this a little bit, but I think I'm an advocate for really focusing on 5-year projections of, we'll call them fixed costs. As you guys all know, the fixed costs are the majority of the budget. Debt service, wages, benefits, insurance, things like that. And wages are to some extent fixed because what we pay people is contained in a compensation plan or collective bargaining agreements. The number of people we have doing the work is the thing that's flexible. But I think those are things that we're already thinking about in terms of wages and benefits and things like that, and as a part of the talent attraction and retention that was mentioned at the top. So as we get closer to this, and Parashar knows that I feel this way, that I think the focus should be on the fixed costs that we know can be projected more easily. The rest of it, I think, turns into a lot more work and a lot more uncertainty. So I don't think you get a lot of bang for the metaphorical buck by trying to guess what, utility line items are going to be, or, the discretionary stuff, expenses and stuff, so if, it's not going to give you everything, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea.
I think that's still good. I think it's an improvement. Parashar, is that what you're thinking, is focusing on what
Well, my
Stephen just
thought is,
described?
yeah, 3 to 5, 7 different categories. Certainly agree that the mandatory ones would be 80%, 70%, whatever that number is. And for the rest of it, I called it goods and services in the conversation I had with Jared and Carrie. And I don't think you ought to project out on a line by line basis, but just lump everything together, goods and services, and take your best guess based on what you think the rate might be, 3%, 4%, pick a number. And I think you get most of the value out of doing it that way versus putting in a whole lot of time and effort to try to do this at a line level detail. What are utilities going at? What are, car costs going up, et cetera. So I agree with Stephen, but I do think it's important just to have the 100% picture. And if 10 or 15% is really, hey, we've lumped everything else together, called it goods and services, and we expect that to grow at the rate of inflation, well, then that's great. On the other end, if you're expecting that to grow at 10%, that might be a conversation we should have around, geez, why 10%, right? So again, more to drive the discussion than to start nitpicking all the numbers underneath.
Right. Okay, so where have you left it with with the town and the school. So are they going to do an attempt at this at some point, Parashar?
Yeah, in the last set of conversations I had, and again, really stressed Jared and Carrie and Stephen and Lori, we don't want to create a whole lot of extra work to the extent that you can lump these together, agree on the 5 to 7 categories. I started with 3 simple ones, and when Carrie and I talked, I think we ended up with 5 or 7, right? But whatever makes sense, make sure they're aligned with the schools and the towns, 5 years out, and then I think we were talking about September, coming to FinCom, basically with, hey, here are the 5-year numbers. Oh, by the way, in September, also have a conversation, and this I think is a natural segue into the request letters, is let's focus on the top 3 to 5 strategic issues that the schools and the town believe are going to affect their spending, affect their organization, et cetera. What do they think are the top 3 to 5 strategic issues facing them? Issues, opportunities, et cetera. How do they affect the spending? We'll have an opportunity to talk about those at a high level, both potential financial impact, qualitative conversation. They can take that feedback back, and as they're developing the budget, choose to ignore us, choose to incorporate some of it, et cetera, when they come back in for the detailed budget conversations later in the year. So that was a thought process, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I mean, are people comfortable with that? So we would have earlier than usual. So in September, we would have 2 different sessions, Parashar?
I mean, again, I'll leave it up to Stephen and Lori to help us, because, the goal is to avoid 80 slides and slides, death by slides.
Right.
And have a conversation that's 45 minutes, an hour maybe for the schools and the towns. We can do it in one session, frankly. A lot of this is really driven by the number of issues that are presented, but also, frankly, a little bit discipline on our part to, hey, this is high level. We're going to get to the numbers when they're pulling them together, but this is a high level strategic conversation in terms of some of the choices that they're thinking about making. The great example is the one Stephen pointed out when we were talking a few weeks ago, is, we can continue to keep wages and benefits growth for non-union employees at 1% or 2%, but then that affects service levels and our ability to attract top talent. And when you compare ourselves to the market, it may be that we've got to actually increase the wages and salary lines by 5 to 7%. It may be higher than that CPI number. But
Okay.
there's a good reason why we want to do it. And here's what the range of that estimate impact might be over the next 5 years, but we'll come in December with some more detail, right?
Yeah. Okay. So if we say, so just because I'd like to kind of, if we're going to get to the letters, because we have to get those done. So we have a regular meeting in September on the 23rd. So the 5th Thursday would be the 30th. So if you want to have a meeting on the 30th of September with both the town and the schools, question is whether the committee, I mean, I think if we keep it at a high level, so we're not going to spend a lot of time asking questions about how did you come up with these projections, right? It's going to be a discussion about what do you see as the issues and how is that affecting costs over the next 5 years? It's that the conversation is going to be at that level. Then I would suggest we book that for the 30th of September, if the schools and the towns can do that. And that would be our first review of preparing for guidelines. So we would start that, and then we'll pick some other dates later on. And we would have what I would call a more typical conversation in that second round, where the towns and the schools would, take us through, again, hopefully at a higher level, but, where they're coming out for budget requests for FY23. Would that summarize it, Parashar?
I think that's right. And I think the one addition is when we do that second round, hopefully that first round will have informed us and given us an expectation of what we might expect.
Yes.
So again, we can focus even in the second round on those top level issues. Of course, the detailed tables would be available in appendix if folks want to peruse through those, and I either ask questions after we're done with the issues, or perhaps even we collect the written questions. If they're factual questions, submit them in and they come back to us in a written form, right? But something to sort of trim it down and really focus on the high level issues.
Okay, good. So, okay, so I think that's sort of makes sense to me. We can go with that. And then we still have our regular information request letters, but you can take us through what we're doing with that. And those will include, I think those were sent out in advance. Is that right, Parashar?
I don't remember, Carrie, and I'm
were,
having
yeah, they
problems
were.
with getting emails
Okay.
from Carrie.
Good.
Did we
So-
include those in the stuff that went out yesterday?
Yes,
I believe
Yes, they did.
so.
yes,
Yeah,
they did.
So, yeah, I think they were there. Okay. So people had a chance to look at those. So Parashar, why don't you quickly take us through what's in those info request letters?
Before we move to those, can I just ask
Yes,
one question about
please,
this new approach?
Yes.
And that is, we need to issue a preliminary guideline and then come back around with another round of meetings. So where does the preliminary fit into this new model where you have the kind of very high level meeting and then you have the next level meeting? And then after that, do we issue the preliminary? Is that when that out?
That's a good question, Dean. I guess, based on today's conversation, if we're gonna stick to the current formula, we can issue the preliminary guidelines now because I hope John Hicklin, yeah, he's still
No,
here.
no. The
No,
guideline is
no,
not the
no.
SGR. That's
Oh,
different.
I'm sorry.
The SDR is different.
He's talking about the
SDR is
guidelines,
just a
right.
number.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking we can issue the preliminary guidelines. We'll have an SGR number, and then I think in September, when they actually come to us with their high-level projection, that might be another data point to inform us of what a preliminary guideline could look like, right? So I would suggest we do it after they come in, present the issues they're facing. We'll have a better sense of why the cost numbers are coming out the way they are. We could take that into account and issue a preliminary guideline at that point.
In October or at the end of,
At the end of the meeting or early October.
you're not gonna have enough time to discuss it at the end of the meeting. So I would say in October, Dean, we would do a preliminary.
Okay, so, well, I guess the new piece of this puzzle is this high level meeting where both people come in and we can get it done in 45 minutes, for the schools and 45 for the town. And that's just a very high level. What kind of issues are you facing and what's the big picture look like? I don't think at that point we're in a position to issue a preliminary guideline for either of those two entities. So I think we're going to have a follow-up, more meaty conversation with each of those entities before we issue our preliminary guideline. Mary, what do you think about that?
Well, I thought the 23rd was, okay, I thought the 23rd they were coming in to talk, and the 30th they're coming in to talk about their 5-year. Am I out of sync with what's other people?
The 23rd is a regular meeting.
That's just a regular meeting.
And what's the 30th? And the 30th is what we used to do before, which is, what do you see coming up in the next year? What are your?
Well,
yes, that's right. It's but what it is now is the 5-year projection that
what we used to do is the first time they would come in, it would be responsive to our request letter. And this extra meeting that we're now discussing is this sort of high level thing where they're talking about their 5-year projection, and it's not really about their responsive to the letter. So maybe we're just adding an extra meeting at the front end, which is this high level 5-year is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, the goal was not to do that. So let me do this. How about if I huddle with Stephen, Carrie, Lori, and Jared, or some subset of those, and see to what extent, based on the letters we're going to review today, they might be able to come in with the information in those letters on September 30th.
I have to speak up. I think you need to get the school committee and the select board involved as well. Remember, the letters go to the school committee and the select board. So they need to be okay with this calendar as well. I mean, they're the elected representatives that put this budget in front of the town. So I really feel like we're making calendars and we're writing letters and we're not involving important players.
I'd like to second that because I think that there's always been a little bit of or at least my recollection is there's always been a little bit of a challenge for the school committee to really kind of shore up numbers, shore up their point of view. And I think that I like this approach just in terms of us really trying to level set collectively. But I wonder if the 30th or a meeting of the 30th, it feels like we need to have a much better understanding of what that meeting is all about. And we need to define what we want from them. Because if we've got 45 minutes, or if that was the time, if that's the amount of time we're going to devote to this, like what questions do they need to answer and what questions do we want to explore? Because these meetings can run, the level of scrutiny that these folks, we may ask them may be more than high level. So what is it that we really want to get out of these meetings? And Parshar, this may be just, I'm maybe swatting this back to you just to kind of recap. I'd love to know sort of specifically what conversation would you like to have at this 30th meeting, as opposed to them writing us a letter in a response highlighting these are the high level issues. Here's what we're seeing, digest this and let's talk in more detail at a later date.
Yep. So I'll give you a couple hypothetical topics that one could see that the schools or the towns could come in with, right? So, if our expectation, for example, and I already gave the example of attracting, retaining, and developing top talent for town employees. If our expectation is, hey, we think the town budget ought to grow no more than 3% a year, but Stephen and Carrie come and say, hey, wait a minute, what we're planning to do, one strategic challenge that we have is attracting top talent. We've actually taken a look at the compensation levels in Concord today. We've compared it to the market and we can see, we're in the 50th percentile. And we think we need to get back to the 75th. And here are the steps that it's going to take. And here's what the 5-year cost is going to be like. And so that's an example, Brian, of one of the top issues that I would presume could be, is a good example from my perspective that I'd like to hear about and talk about and listen, right? On the school side, again, I'm going to make up an example. And part of why you'll see in the letters, I kind of opted or I'm suggesting that we leave it open-ended is really hear from them and make this an interactive conversation versus presuming to ask some questions on some specific topics. But one of the conversations, an example from the school could be, hey, we're planning to electrify all school vehicles. And here's what the cost is going to be this year and next year. It'll even out. And that's why you're going to see a bump over the next few years in our request, right? There may be other strategic issues like that. And frankly, if there's only 2 or 3, that's fine, right? I'm not looking for 5 specifically, but it's to talk about those issues that have, plus or minus 5 to 10% impact on the budget spending over the next 5 years. Does that help, Brian?
No, that helps a lot. And I think that your last point here is, I guess what I was really trying to understand was putting some guidelines around level of impact topic. So if it falls below, I'm making up the number, 5 to 10% in the bandwidth, we don't want to cover that. What we really want to cover are the 10 plus, the delta on 10 plus percent or something like that. So they have a very good sense of what those topics should be. And then we can tighten it up because, the school, may come back and say, these are really important topics, but they're sub 10% and they're really not germane to what we're driving towards. So that was my only point. So thank you.
Could I make a comment? So back when I first started with the town, and Dean may be the only one who remembers doing this. Terry probably does as well, but we used to start the budget process in September with a joint meeting of the select board, the school committee. We invited in the Carlisle Finance Committee, maybe representatives from the Carlisle School Committee. And we did this right around the 5th Thursday in September. And everybody came in and talked about what their highest priorities were really for the 1 year. We didn't necessarily talk about 5 years, but that's sounding to me sort of like the meeting you're talking about on the 30th. And we stopped doing that because I think people felt that that wasn't adding any value, or they weren't really sure what the purpose of that was. But it's interesting to hear the discussion because we haven't done it in a few years. And now we're talking about wanting to do that. And that's going to add value to the process. So because most of you were not here when we did that, I just wanted to point that out.
think I was here for 1 year of that. That's about it.
Okay.
Well, can I ask something else? Sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess as Dean to add value.
It's nice to be in the same room, let's put it that way, and just hear people speak to their concerns. It's kind of a rare event that you can pull the Carlisle people in and have them in the same space, but it's a shared responsibility to have the Concord Carlisle school district be a financial shared responsibility between the towns. So it could be useful. I mean, I'm not sure it was a big whiz bang success, but that's all I can say.
Okay. So, yes, Mary.
I'm not actually, I'm not sure those were valuable meetings. I've been to those types of meetings at other towns. But I'm not sure there's a lot of value added there, but I would like to make sure that whatever we decide to have, as far as meetings, whether they're responses to letters or whether they're long-term planning, that the school committee and the select board are a voice in that discussion. That's my point. I don't want to add another meeting. We don't have joint meetings that we don't have much meat to talk about, but I just want to make sure that those committees are involved in this process. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we can do that, right? So I can reach out to both bodies and we can talk about what it is we're proposing that's different in the process. And I think that's very doable for us to do that. So I think that's fine. We can take that as a to-do. But I'm still sort of stuck on, Parashar, what do you want to do, right? So we don't meet in August normally to talk about this. So if you want to do something in September, if you want to wait until October, then we have time to talk about this again in September, or or we make a proposal tonight for how you want to hit the meetings. It sounds like we need more more detail for the committee is what it sounds like to me.
How about, so I agree, I think we should talk to the select board and the school committee. And so maybe we propose to them that we'd like to talk about this in September, whether it's a joint or sequential. I was thinking just sequential, but having a joint one is fine, same meeting. Get their input and thoughts on it, and if they're agreeable to this, then we proceed. If they'd like to push it to October, is there a reason we couldn't do that, even if our letter that we'll review today has a September date? That's just an administrative thing, right? If Chris, if you're able to talk to them in the next week or so and get a sense of whether they're agreeable.
Yeah, we don't have to issue the letter till the 31st, right? So we have a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But they, we certainly have the time to talk to the chairs. We don't have the time to schedule a joint meeting. I think the joint meeting idea is, I'm not a fan of that one.
I'm not either. You're talking about September 30th, right?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah.
I think that's right.
I don't think we need a joint meeting.
Step up to the table sequentially. We don't need that to be a joint affair.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking sequentially.
But sequentially what? So you would have a meeting with.
First 45 minutes, Stephen and Carrie talk about the town. Next 45 minutes, Jared and Lori.
Yes.
Right? That's what I mean.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you now. Okay. So we will, you and we'll go back and have some other discussions, and we'll see if all the parties, including the ones Mary's have mentioned, are comfortable with an approach that starts in late September. Okay. If they are, then we'll get a date and we'll put that date in the letter that we issue at 7/31. Does that make sense to people? Are you comfortable? Is the committee comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yep.
All right, good. So that's what we'll do. And all right, so that will be at least the starting point. So we put in there, and if we have to add another meeting, we'll add another meeting. If we don't, if we think we can do it in two, we'll try and do it in two. But whatever we do, I want to make sure everybody understands you will have enough bites at the apple, right? We weren't trying to reduce your ability to ask questions or somehow shortcut the process. That was not the intention. The intention was to have, in fact, better information. And you need to be comfortable though with what, what you're gonna, the time you're gonna have to talk to the budget units and process the information, and we will make sure you do. Okay. Do you want to talk about the letters, Parashar?
Yeah, and so what I would suggest on the letters is let me share the letters, talk a little bit about the philosophy behind them, some of which I've already talked about, and then I guess an open question to the committee, and actually to Chris, to you. Do we want to make live edits now, or do you think it's more efficient for people to absorb the conversation? If they have edits to the letter, send them in to me,
Yeah.
and I can collate them in a
Yeah.
manner that's compliant with open meeting.
Yeah, no, it's fine. They can send,
Okay.
individual committee members can send edits to Parashar directly if they have any on the letters. I think you had a chance to look at them. I think the letters look pretty good myself, but if you have something that isn't on there in particular, so a topic that you normally would like to hear from the budget units on and somehow it's not there, I would say that's a good item to get in front of Parashar so we can adjust it.
Okay.
So philosophically, you'll notice one thing that I'm proposing is we have two letters, one that goes jointly to the school and the town, and another one that goes to the Minuteman School District. I'll walk you through the school and the town letter first. And so, we start off again with the notion of, hey, come to us with the top 3 to 5 strategic issues, challenges, opportunities that you see facing the town and the schools, how you're planning to address those topics. Either maybe you've already started, right? And there's going to be a rollover impact downstream in 23 and later years, or potentially thinking about starting in 23 and again, potential consequences for later years, and then the financial impact, if any, to Concord. And then in addition to sharing those topics, share what we're calling the expenditure growth model that we've already talked a little bit about. So again, at a very high level, share those 2 items with us. And then basically, this is where the exhibits come in. If the following topics that you see listed here separately for the town and then the schools are not already addressed in the top 3 to 5 issues that you're going to talk about, then talk about it in the backup appendices, if you will, and give us a little bit more detail. For example, the very first one, I think this is one that we've typically done, major variations in actual spend versus plan. And again, here, I think Greg or was it Brian, somebody said, geez, as long as we're making it high level, plus or minus 10% impact, basically. So again, just stick to the very top line issues that make a big difference. Any service levels, major service levels that you're planning on changing that, again, were not addressed at the top, right? If they already were, then we don't need to get very granular about it. Again, similar take on the capital program here. And again, we're talking about tier 2 capital plan because tier 3 will come under the new process, I guess. And then the OPEB, the same thing. Again, call of the school and the towns, whether OPEB would be one of the top 3 to 5 that they think are major issues, land acquisitions, and then any additional information that they think might be helpful as we think about next year's guideline recommendation. Similar construct for the schools. Again, the budget variation, spending levels that are major that are going to be affected that already weren't talked about in the top issues. Insight and information on the capital program, the impact of enrollment on school spending and operations, any future reforms and educational mandates, either from the state or federal government that affect spending. And then the regional school district has OPEB and provide the funding status of that. And again, any additional information that you think might be helpful. So at a high level, those are the areas that we thought they ought to focus on in a granular detail. Either, as we mentioned earlier, if they can provide this information at the end of September, great, but we have an offline conversation about when do you think you can have this information ready for us to talk about as we go through the budget process. So that's the school one. Let me just walk you through the Minuteman one and then just get your reactions as in terms of any major items that were missing or that needed to be listed there. And again, the same construct here, right? The difference is for the Minuteman, because it's a small percentage of overall town spending, we're not asking Minuteman to put together 5-year spending projections. But again, just come to us with the following areas. And here we're a little bit more prescriptive in terms of the topics that we wanted to see. In essence, what's our assessment? What are our assessments going to look like over the next 5 years? What's the cost look like per Minuteman student to Concord, OPEB, and then anything else that they see missing, if you will. And again, how are you addressing these issues, current fiscal year, future fiscal years, and how do they affect spending? And then just focusing in on similar topics that might not already be covered by the request up front, basically. So short, sweet letters to those 4 entities. Reactions, thoughts? Oh, I saw Greg and then Dean.
Sure. Why combined the 2 letters to the Concord town and to the schools? It just makes, each entity read more to figure out what they need to submit to you.
Well, the first half is identical for both. And then there's like 5 bullets for each one of them on the next one. I mean,
I get it. It's like sending an email with 3 questions. You only get an answer to the first one, right? So it's like you're giving information to the town or vice versa that isn't needed, that they need to read through and parse. Just a suggestion there.
yeah, I mean, on the other hand, from my perspective, it's, asking both of them to think about the same things, knowing that they're thinking about the same thing. So half of 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Dean, and then Peggy.
Yeah, simply on the Minuteman one, you might want to include a comment in there, please give us an update on membership. That's going to be a driver, whether they have, new towns who are thinking about coming in or not, or towns that are leaving, and how that's going to drive the costs, because there seems to be some volatility in the membership at this point with Minuteman. So
Yeah, I'll actually add that to the top, one of those top items,
Yeah.
Dean, as opposed. Okay.
That's fine.
That's good. Peggy?
Yeah, just one really little one. When you're talking to the schools about land acquisition, I think we should throw in disposition. And of course, that is directly related to the Peabody School site.
Yeah, so that land acquisition was actually for the town.
Okay.
But having said that, should we include a disposition here for the schools? I raised that out to the
The
broad.
town owns the property,
Town
so
owns the
I think
property, yeah.
it's okay in the town spot.
Right.
It doesn't belong in the school spot.
Okay, in the town's then.
Okay, but I'll add the disposition in the town one.
Certainly a question that's on the table. We should
Yes.
probably add disposition.
Yep, no, that's good. I'll add that to the town. And then Mary?
Parashar, in the letter to the town and the schools, you say when you address the 5-year projections of spending, you say as detailed in the expenditure growth model. Is there another document that gets specific, or what is this expenditure growth model that you reference here?
It's the model that we talked about earlier. I just asked Carrie to give it a point of reference so that she and Jared know what that is. That's what that really is.
Okay, so it's like a placeholder.
Yeah, it's a placeholder. They know what it is.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so Chris, what I'm proposing, it's Thursday. Could we get comments back? If folks have detailed comments or additions, subtractions to the letters by close of business Monday. And I think that would give us time to make the edits and for Chris, for us to have the conversations with school and select board folks and get them out by the 31st. Does that make sense?
That's fine for me. We're also going to have to work on the dates, right? So to make sure, so we should probably have, we'll probably send something around to the committee so they understand the dates that we've gotten.
Yep.
So prelim guideline, final guideline, these meetings, right? So we'll lay that out for the committee so they can see it.
Yep.
Okay. No, I think that works.
And I think that's all I had to cover.
I think that's right. I think that was quite a bit.
It was. Good job,
So
Tarsha.
thank you, Parashar. Thank you, Parashar. Okay, the next one is final FY21 budget adjustment, which Carrie is going to take us through.
Okay, so in your packet, there was a memo that was included that talked about some additional line item transfers that need to occur on the town side in order to close the town's budget for fiscal year 21. And so just a quick reminder to committee members that the town's budget is appropriated in 16 individual line items. And transfers are then only allowed between those line items, either by town meeting action or under the procedure that's outlined in Mass General Law, Chapter 44, Section 33B, which is what we're going to be talking about this evening. So this is a provision in Mass General Law that allows for transfers within a certain time frame, May 1st to July 15. And I know we're past July 15, but it's very difficult because state law also requires us to process our final accounts payable warrant on July 15. And so we take a little bit of a liberal interpretation with this, and we process that final AP warrant, prepared this request, and then we just bring it to you at your next regularly scheduled meeting. So the transfers that are needed this evening are transferring money to, the first one is to public safety, second to our Social Security and Medicare line, and the third to debt service, and transferring from human services and some of our insurance accounts. And I'll just take a moment to go through these transfers. And at the beginning of the meeting, the chair mentioned that we did just make some transfers at annual town meeting, and annual town meeting occurred pretty late in the year. And so I'll just talk a little bit about, why we're proposing some additional transfers now. So for public safety, this is line item 6, and we're proposing to transfer $400,000. And I think before I go any further, I just want to make sure everybody understands these are not additional appropriations. These are just moving monies from the town's appropriated budget line to line to close out. So $400,000 in public safety. And this one really is needed because one of the large transfers from at annual town meeting was from public safety. You might recall that we requested town meeting transfer about $545,000 from public safety to public works to cover the substantial cost of the drainage improvements at Sawmill Brook that were unforeseen. And we thought we had the availability within public safety because based on all of our expenditure models and the availability of the Federal CARES Act funding, we thought we were going to have a substantial savings in public safety. As it turns out, we did not have the spending in public safety over the last couple of months of the fiscal year far outpaced our models. And so that was unfortunate. And if we hadn't moved the money at annual town meeting, we wouldn't need to be talking about this transfer to public safety because we moved $545,000 out, and now I'm asking to move $400,000 of that back. And really the issues here with public safety are our overtime expenses really exceeded what our models were projecting. And also we had an additional capital expenditure for cruisers. And the reason that this cruiser capital expenditure was advanced really has to do with the fact that the microchips inside of cruisers are in short supply because of the fire at or the destruction of one of the manufacturing plants. And and it really impacts everything from laptops to cruisers to probably plenty of other things. But the police chief was contacted by his supplier that we purchase cruisers from off of the state contract, and encouraged to place an order early so that we could have these cruisers in time for when we usually put them in service. And so the decision was made to place an early order for the cruisers. And we don't have any way to access, in June, we don't have any way to access fiscal 22 funding. And so we knew we had the money here if we could do this additional transfer. So I do see a hand up. Amrith, did you want to ask a question? Oh, a couple of hands before we go any further.
So my question was, is the money been appropriated in 22 for the cruisers already that you're just going to spend now, with the understanding that you already have it for next year?
So there is money in fiscal 22 that is appropriated for cruisers. But I'm not, Stephen, I don't know if you want to respond whether or not we would be purchasing additional cruisers in 22 or not.
I'd have to look at the schedule. As Carrie mentioned, this was kind of a quick decision that we had to make to avoid not being able to replace cruisers that were end of service life. Obviously, if the schedule, if the ones we ordered were on the schedule for FY22, then I wouldn't order ones that we didn't need. But I'll have to take a look at the schedule and see what's left for replacement.
Okay.
And Brian?
Yeah. Hey, Carrie. Just so I'm clear in understanding, these line items are really just sort of fungible changes that need to be made in order to sort of balance to pay for things that need to be paid for, correct?
That's correct. And then anything that is left over in the line items will close to the fund balance.
Okay. So just real quick. So with respect, you transferred from public safety to public works. Is that right? 540K. Now you're wanting to transition 400 of that back.
That's correct.
Okay. But the question I have is the 540 that needed to be transferred over to public works, they don't need it anymore, or was that sort of for planning purposes, or are there going to be open items that they hope to address in 22? I'm just curious to know what's going on with that.
Sure. So we're not proposing to transfer back to public works. We will be transferring from the insurance lines. And so the money that was transferred to public works is committed and intended to be expended, and probably more than 50% expended at this time for those repairs. The transfer back to public safety is actually going to come from, if you refer to the memo, we have funds coming from human services, from our group insurance account, and unemployment and workers' comp. So human services is library and senior center and community services. Those operations were closed or operating under reduced services for part of the year. There were some vacancies, particularly in the library, that were not filled during those closures. And so there is money available there. I could have, and Christine and I were talking about this at the beginning of the meeting, I could have, when we were preparing this for town meeting, proposed transfers from the group insurance accounts, but our practice is that anything that's left over in the group insurance accounts, we close to an insurance reserve account. And we have and maintain an insurance reserve account because some of our insurance coverages are self-funded. And so we'd like to save that so that we have enough in the insurance reserve account in the event that we have a catastrophic loss. And so when I thought we had the money in public safety, that was what we opted to do so that we could preserve those balances in the insurance accounts to close out. That, unfortunately, that is not what's going to happen, but we're definitely not taking anything back from Public Works.
Okay, I must have misheard what you said then. So thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Eric?
Did you say that there's precedent for doing this in previous fiscal years? The maneuver itself, I understand we've done this before, but outside of that time period that's specified in general law, outside of the first 15 days of the fiscal year?
Yes, yes. I can tell you, when I first started here, we were doing this much later. We've pushed really hard to bring it as close to as we can to July 15th. We've talked it over with our auditors. The auditors don't have any issue. They understand the issue with doing the final warrant and the timing of meetings. And I've even talked to town council about it and the Department of Revenue. And I'm not sure there's a community in Massachusetts that is doing this on July 15th because of all of the difficulties and just pulling everything together.
The calendar. Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Thanks, Carrie. So I just want to, I guess, restate it. So it seems to me, absent the fact that there was a need to put in an order for cruisers, I assume the majority of the 400,000 is the cruisers?
The cruisers is about 100,000.
Oh, it's 100,000. So what is the remainder?
The other is a large amount is overtime, and then there just was an increased, we probably, as soon as we pass the 6-month mark, we are continually modeling expenditure trends, and the expenditures for goods and services was just much higher in public safety than what our model was producing. So I would say about 50% of it was cruisers in overtime, and the rest was just additional spending.
Overtime in the last 2 weeks of June?
No, over a longer period of time that wasn't, so some of it was just the way it was accounted for. It wasn't in just for that period of time, but the way that it got processed was over a longer period of time. I can tell you, we'll all be happy to be finished with COVID, but we have a lot of people that are still working remote. The admins in both fire and police are working remote, and it takes a lot to get things processed, particularly those large payrolls when people are remote and don't have access to all of their, well, I see Stephen, so I'll stop talking.
I do want to say, I don't know I will say later in the year, we had a number of positions, a number of people leave through either retirements or accepting new positions, all within the last, I think since May 1st. And I think at least 3 folks have left the police department. And when you have shift vacancies as a result of an injury or someone retiring or moving to another job, it creates a lot of overtime because the existing force has to absorb those shifts. So we have a lot of officers working double shifts and things like that to cover those vacancies. So that all was relatively late in the fiscal year.
And the managers of those departments, when do they communicate, hey, I'm running way high on OT? Don't they have to communicate that earlier than 2 weeks before the fiscal year end? I mean, don't they know that?
When they know that they're going to have the problem, they do communicate they communicate the factors that are going to drive the overtime. But some of the notice, and some of the retirements, the notice was, a couple of weeks. So sometimes they don't have as much advance notice as we would like.
Right. Well, they didn't give you a lot of advance notice to close the books. I mean, that's just what's striking me is I'm just surprised at the size of it. And given that we already, we had done this analysis before town meeting. So I'm just surprised at the size of it, to come in so late. It just I'm just curious about the closing process and how well it's working. That's the questions really behind it.
Well, there must be vacation payouts and stuff like that too, right? Would that add to
There were some additional vacation payouts as a result of COVID that did happen. Chris, I guess what I would say is that this is unusual for us. I'm not concerned that in a regular year that this is a problem. I mean, we haven't seen this before, and I don't expect that we will see it again.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Carrie.
Mary?
Yeah, Carrie, I've got a question about the very last paragraph in your memo, which says that even with these additional adjustments, we expect to close the town's FY21 budget approximately 200,000 under appropriation. So I assume that's the amount that will flow to free cash at the end of FY21. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the estimate.
Okay, so I'm also assuming that this is a lot less than we usually have flow to free cash at the end of a fiscal year. And I'm wondering if that jeopardizes the fact that every year we expect to use $1 million of free cash to offset increases to property taxes because of guideline spending.
Sure. So in the part of the fiscal 22 budget was an assumption that we would carry forward $867,000 worth of unspent fiscal 21 appropriation. And we did that because we knew some of our operations were, we weren't running at full capacity. And that was a way to maintain level services in fiscal 22 with reduced local receipts and not having to hit property tax. So what we're actually closing fiscal 21 with is 867,000 plus 200,000.
But we're using 867,000 of that in FY22 for what you just explained. So I think what we're used to every year is having $1 million left over so that we can use $1 million. It's like Dean has explained it as like a Ferris wheel.
Yeah.
We over budget by $1 million. We use that to offset the next year, and this just continues. And now I'm thinking that what we're doing is we don't have that $1 million available to us for FY23. Is that accurate?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay.
It is, but that also means we didn't levy for it, Mary.
I understand, but it does pose a problem in FY23, if I'm thinking correctly, right? Because in FY23, we would think, well, we've got to raise some money to cover spending, but we've got $1 million. So it helped us in FY22, but I see it a problem in FY23. Am I?
Well, we definitely, we're going to have a low add to free cash.
Right, okay.
To fiscal 21 activity, but as Stephen mentioned, it's important to keep in mind that the budget for the last two budgets, the property tax increase has been very low. It's been below 2.5%.
That's right, but it's because we're using free cash, right? I mean, one of the main contributing factors to the fact that we've been able to keep property tax below 3% is because we've been using free cash. And,
correct.
And now I'm saying, whoa, we don't have as much. We did. That's all. That's all.
But if local receipts come back in FY23, it would mitigate that impact.
Okay. Fair point. Thank you.
Yeah. Dean?
So my question is actually simple. we transferred a large amount of money, over $500,000 to Public Works to shore up Monument Street. And in the last, say, 2 weeks, there's been a significant amount of work done up there. There's lights up there for one-way traffic. Are we good with that, or is that much more than we had anticipated having to spend up there?
I'm not sure I follow. Like, is what we asked for at town meeting sufficient to do the work?
That's pretty much it. Yes.
Yeah.
Does it feel like it's sufficient to do the work? The work just seems to have expanded exponentially from where we were. We were in this holding pattern. You could drive cars in 2 directions. It was all fine. And then like 2 weeks ago, like the whole side of the road is carved up and there's big pilings being put in. All that stuff was planned for and anticipated, and we've got that budgeted. We're good.
Yeah. The first couple of weeks, all they were really doing was pumping water.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it sounds good. Sounds like you got it under control. I'm happy to hear that. It's good.
Hopefully so.
Okay. Thanks.
Eric?
Sorry, you already answered my question.
Oh,
Craig.
okay. Okay. So I just want to mention the other couple of items that are on there. Obviously, the transfer to public safety is the most significant. There's also a request to transfer $11,200 from Social Security and Medicare, and $40,000 or to Social Security and Medicare, and $40,000 to debt service. And I just want to mention, we have, employees that work, that may work, do some work cross funds, their salary might cross funds. And we do charge each of the funds for the salary and payroll expense for employees. And we have to make those estimates pretty early. We typically are making, that's part of our fixed cost estimates. We're typically doing that in September and October for the following July. And so we were slightly off with payroll tax, and that's why that adjustment is needed. And because it's in its own standalone item, we can't make that transfer, even though it's small, on an administrative basis. And then in terms of debt service, and this is my mistake. I should have picked this up. I should have remembered this when we were doing the transfers at town meeting. But based on the repayment schedule for the last bond issue, I put in an estimate, and I'm working with an estimate, but sometimes a different repayment schedule looks a little better. And the repayment schedule that we settled on for fiscal 21 for this bond issue was about $40,000 higher than what we had estimated. And I knew that we would be able to absorb that from somewhere within the budget. So we went ahead with that. And so those are the transfers that are needed to close fiscal 21.
And do we need a vote on that, Carrie?
Yes, you do. And then the second part of this closeout process is I will bring the same list of transfers to the select board at their next meeting.
Okay.
So Chris, I'll make a motion to approve the transfers as outlined in the memo that Carrie has sent to the Finance Committee.
Second.
Great. Any discussion?
Sorry, Carrie, can I just ask one quick question on that last debt service point? Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me, but at one point you explained that it was due to a more favorable schedule.
Yes.
And that is because we brought the payments forward so that the total amount of debt service would at some point be less. How is it more favorable?
So we shortened up the repayment schedule on one or two of the items that were in there. So we may have, and I don't have the exact particulars, but we'll plan to pay items over either 5 years or 10 years, but sometimes we're able to, with taking into account the premium, shorten up to 4 years or 3 years. And this was an attempt to sort of standardize the repayment schedule for like items using premium and just increasing the annual debt service. Is that making sense?
Well, so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, is it a timing issue? And have we brought it forward so that it costs more at the current time, but there's some eventual savings, I guess was my question.
Yes, correct. So we're paying more, we're repaying the principal faster, so the interest savings over the life of the bond is less than it would be.
Okay, that's what I was trying to understand. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, there's no further discussion. I'll take a roll call vote. Chris Reynolds, yes. Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Dee Ortner. Yes, okay. Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
Yes.
Amrith Kumar,
Yes.
Greg Griallo,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs,
Yes,
John Hickling.
Yes.
Did I get everybody?
You missed
Eric,
me, Chris.
I'm sorry, Eric, you're in the dark there. I didn't see you. Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you. It's unanimous. Okay. The next item, I think, is observers. Does anyone have anything in particular to report on observations?
I can
Mary?
just quickly, I listened to the Economic Advisory Committee meeting, no, Economic Vitality Committee meeting. And two things that are interesting to us is that they've got a consultant that they've hired to help them understand how to, or help them learn ways to facilitate the establishment and growth of small businesses within Concord. And I think this is a great idea, because if you listen to any of the stories, especially Deborah Stark will tell you a lot of stories about how hard it is to start and grow businesses. So this is good news as far as helping the retail sector. It is focused on the retail sector and not like any broader or larger businesses, but this is still good news. The other thing is that I think Concord is in line for about $5.6 million in ARPA money. And I think Stephen can talk more about this later. And a portion of that will be going to economic vitality. And a portion of that I think is going to cybersecurity. But Stephen, I think you're going to be talking at the select board meeting this Monday. Do I have that correct as far as?
No, we will be talking at a select board meeting, but not Monday. We're in the process of outlining a plan that we would present to the board. We just haven't gotten to it yet. We've only gotten one allocation that's relatively small. And so we are working towards our plan, but I mean, the big ticket items are broadband is an eligible expense. And we've already identified, especially in the downtown, a lack of coverage. And so that's an area of focus. Plus economic recovery is a big area of focus. And, as I think I've mentioned here before, we haven't think until 2024 to spend that money. And so we want to do kind of a slow roll on this a little bit as well. Unlike CARES, where you were on a deadline to spend it and we had needs related to employee and resident health and safety, this money is really, I think, more for strategic investments that will yield, longer term results. And that's how we're looking at it.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Stephen,
And that will help with local receipts, right? All this is to help with local receipts. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. That's all I got.
Yeah.
Stephen, the way that COVID worked, they sort of gave us the money, I think, we spent the money and then we would have to apply then for reimbursement. Does ARPA work the same way? Or does it come with a grant and then,
Well, I think we've gotten some up front. I mean, there's eligibility things you have to work through. And I know Carrie's been reviewing this as well, but I also think there's money that we would probably have to spend up front and get reimbursed, depending on the timing of the initiative.
Okay.
So I can just, give a quick update. So the way it's going to work is they are going to give 50% upfront, but it appears it's coming in monthly installments. And the second 50% will be available to us no sooner than a year after we got the final installment of the first 50%.
So they give you half, but they give it to you monthly.
Yes. That's the state. So it's, the federal government has given it to the state. And this is the state's rule that it's giving it to us monthly.
Thank you. Dean.
Yeah, I'm the observer to the middle school building committee. They met last Thursday morning. They are off to the races with the next phase of the project. It's called schematic design. They've have turned the bulk of the work over to the professionals. There were a number of subcommittees that had been established, a design subcommittee, an energy subcommittee, sustainability, et cetera. Those subcommittees have been discontinued for the time being. And the professionals are meeting with town staff and others to just iron out details about, how we hook up to the water service, or how big the septic system has to be, and how the fire codes are going to work, et cetera. So they're in some very technical areas right now. From our perspective, which is a money perspective, we had sent them a letter trying to request that they, try to move the number down to about 100 million. They are at about 101 and change. So they've thoughtfully done what they can. The superintendent gave back 2 spaces within her educational areas. And so those spaces were then consumed by the community requests for a larger gymnasium and a larger auditorium. So there wasn't really a huge movement in savings on those, but they're slightly over 100 million now. And the question is, do they have the will to try to keep pushing that down? In my view, right now, there's little appetite for that. They're kind of like where they are. So,
Dean,
Yeah.
if costs came in higher than they had anticipated, due to, sort of this unusual inflationary period that we're in,
Yeah.
or other reasons, do you believe that there would be a trade-off? In other words, if they understand that they're really at the cap here, and if costs came in higher, they would have to have some different discussions.
Well, we're in a weird area here when you talk about that, because as they go along, the design is becoming more and more frozen. It's very hard when you get farther down the road to all of a sudden, change horses if somebody says your costs are now 10-15% higher than you anticipated. I don't know what they would do. I honestly don't know. Would they just have to revisit the size of the auditorium? Would they have to, I don't know what they could actually do, because things start to get frozen up in terms of what you're doing. So it is just to give the committee a sense of this, late in the game during schematic design, things are pretty much formalized. Everything is, all the systems are specified, the air handling systems, the heating and cooling are all defined. They send the design out to a third party for formal estimating. It's neither the architects nor the Hill International or project manager doing the estimating anymore in terms of the costs. It's sent to a third party, and that is anticipated to be done very late in schematic design. And then within a short number of weeks, we would be at a town meeting. I don't know if it were to come back with a number that was, escalated 5 or 10%, whether there would be anything that could be done within a few short weeks, and then town meeting's already been scheduled. So we're in a weird, I'm not sure how that works, honestly.
Yeah, well, that's that's a very good point, and that's one that I will be asking, because and one other thing that I know that the select board is going to have a session to look at ways to reduce costs, not via changing schematic design, but by offsets. So whether it's sale of the Peabody property, or user fees, or other ideas that people, FinCom included, have forwarded to the select board. So I know that that's a topic that's still out there, but I think everybody is interested in keeping that cost right around 100 million. So I think people are pretty united on that. So I'm quite sure they got that message. So
No, I don't think there's a lot of appetite at the committee to push it up higher.
Yeah.
There is so I think it's kind of, it is where it is, but there's also not a lot of appetite to keep driving towards reducing it.
Right. Well, it's a challenging problem, right? So,
yeah.
Okay.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen. You're a member. Is that a reasonable assessment there?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think there's contingencies built in to the design, which is supposed to, a design contingency at this stage of the game, which is generous, which is supposed to help with that. But, the community may have to make a choice about which building it wants. And that would maybe be the discussion at town meeting. And then that whatever building that town meeting wanted would if it is approved, would be the one that goes to the voters. And then the voters would decide what do they want, the building that's designed, or do they want something at a certain price. And I think that's really where that'll end up, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
I do know that the committee is working really hard to meet the number.
Yep. Okay. Any other observer reports? Greg.
Yeah, CMLP met last week. It was more of a procedural meeting as they changed sort of chairs and all of that. Big discussion on that. Big discussion on the internet issues that were, experienced 2-3 weeks ago. I don't remember the exact time frame, but I think everybody remembers that. And on the article that was passed for the fiber charge for the board there, they still have, I think that's going in front of the select board on Monday to get the actual defined charge of the committee, or if it's a task force or what it is called, and then go forward from there. So nothing financially huge. So those are just the updates from there.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Brian.
Just really quick, nothing really financial related, but met with the library committee met on Tuesday. I think the big ticket item is that the expansion project at the library is going well and they're on budget. So everybody's pretty pleased with that. The opening is probably going to be sort of in the back half of 22. So some good news there, and go visit the library. It's open, and they're actually, I think they're really pleased. They've gotten a lot of staffing. They've made a lot of hires, and so they're sort of replenishing the ranks there with some staffing that had left during COVID. So
good. Anybody else have observer reports? Okay, seeing none, we'll go on to the next thing. I don't believe we have any correspondence, Carrie. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and do we have any public comment? Doesn't sound like it, Chris. Is there anybody raising their hand?
No, they're all on the panel.
Okay, great. All right, so unless we have some other items to discuss, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we'll do roll call vote. Chris Reynolds, yes. Mary Hartman,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
Dee Ortner. Okay. Parashar Patel,
Yes.
Brian Taylor,
yes.
Amrith Kumar,
Yes.
Greg Gorello,
Yes.
Dean Banfield,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs,
Yes.
John Hickling.
Yes.
Okay, so we are adjourned. So
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris.
you're welcome. And thank you all. And we'll send you some more information on the letters and the other questions you raised around the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.